conveyance. He's on a conveyance. And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu is walking. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Yazid says to him, "Oh Abu Bakr, either I come down or you come up. Meaning I walk with you, or you get on another conveyance. You get on another animal, and that way we can talk at the same level. Otherwise, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu is the Khalifa of the Muslims. If out of respect, Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan, he doesn't want to seem disrespectful while that he's riding. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, he is walking. Abu Bakr said, "No, you will not get down, nor will I ride the animal, because I want these steps to count towards my walking in the path of Allah Ta'ala. I want that these steps are counted in the path of Allah Ta'ala." So then he gives him some advice. Abu Bakr is a lengthy hadith, he gives him many advice. At the end of it, he says, "Listen, وَإِنِّي مُوصِيكَ بِعَشْرٍ." He says, "I advise you 10 things." These are not the 10 things that we'll talk about, but these are the 10 rules of war, essentially. The 10 rules of war according to Muslims. Number 1, he says, "La taqtulanna imra'atan." He says, don't kill any woman. "Wala sabiyan," nor any child. "Wala kabiran harimi." Don't kill any elderly individual. "Wala taqtu'anna shajaran muthmira." He says that don't cut down any fruit-bearing trees. Don't cut down fruit-bearing trees. وَلَا تُخَرِّبَنَّ عَامِرًا. Nor should you break down or destroy any buildings or dilapidate any buildings that are functioning. You shouldn't just unnecessarily destroy buildings. Then he says, وَلَا تَعْقِرَنَّ شَاةً وَلَا بَعِيرًا إِلَّا بِمَأْكَلَةٍ. He says, don't slaughter any goats or any camels except for food, except to consume it for food. وَلَا تَحْقِرَنَّ نَحْلًا. You also should not burn down trees or nests of different creatures. So nahl can be referred to the bees' nests, but it can refer to anything also. It says, وَلَا تَحْقِرَنَّ نَحْلًا وَلَا تُغَرِّقَنَّهُ. Nor should you drown, or nor should you drown these animals, their living quarters, meaning the nests and whatever else they have. You shouldn't drown or burn them. Meaning you shouldn't unnecessarily harm these structures. And then he says, "Wala taqtul, wala tajmu." He says you should not steal, nor should you be cowardly. These are the 10 rules of war according to Sharia. And so when people ask us, what does Islam say about this? What are Muslims saying about this? And you should condemn this. We say, listen, this is very clear cut. This is a very clear situation. Islam is very clear on all of these things. And so these are the rules of war according to Sharia, and this is what we should propagate. That we are completely against the killing of women, children, elderly men. Again, these are all non-combatants, meaning people are not fighting. They should not be killed. Similarly, you should not destroy property, you should not destroy the plant life, nor the animal life without valid reason. Nor should you even destroy buildings without valid reason. None of these things should be destroyed. And so this is the Islamic way, or this is the method of the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba, and this is our method, the method of the Muslims. So we don't do these things. These are the 10 rules that we have when it comes to warfare. Nonetheless, we move on. All right, so those are the 10 rules of war. Moving on, I wanted to also speak briefly about Jerusalem. Right, so last week we spoke about Gaza, and we spoke about the atrocities that happened there in the past 75 years or so, and the current situation. But just to take it a step further, and describe the entire situation of Palestine and that region, what's been happening, right? Just to take it a step further and go understand that Jerusalem has a very long history. Masjid al-Aqsa in that area has a very long history. It's been destroyed twice. Masjid al-Aqsa has been destroyed twice, and it was besieged, meaning there were armies attacking it or sieging or laying siege to the area 23 times. 23 times throughout history, 23 times Jerusalem was laid siege upon. It was attacked 52 times. Jerusalem was attacked 52 times, and it was captured and recaptured 44 times. This is the circumstances related to Jerusalem. So this is not the first time. This is not the first time the people of that area are seeing bloodshed. unnecessary bloodshed. It's not the first time. And so this Jerusalem has a very long history. Going on to the Muslim, or in our ummah, what happened in our ummah, 5 years after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, he was the Khalifa, and he took control of Jerusalem from the Byzantine Empire. And he took it very peacefully. He took Jerusalem very peacefully without bloodshed. And they submitted it themselves. They submitted this. They submitted Jerusalem to the Muslims, to Umar radiallahu anhu. But the condition was that we'll only give it to Umar radiallahu anhu. And so I believe I mentioned it last week in this lecture, if I'm not mistaken, that Umar radiallahu anhu, he walked into Jerusalem and he took the keys. And not only that, he didn't pray in the church of Holy Sepulchre. He didn't pray there, but rather he prayed in a separate place so that people would not destroy the churches of that area. He allowed for the churches of that area, and it still remains till today. Not only that, not only does the church still remain, what happens? The Muslim, the keys of the church, they're in the hands of the Muslims. The keys of the church, they're in the hands of the Muslims. Muslims, they open that church every single day. Muslims. Why? Because Muslims are the trustworthy. We are people. Muslims live. I mean, the people. So when Umar he took Jerusalem at that time. For nearly 500 years, Muslims, Jews, they all lived peacefully in that area. Muslims, Jews, everyone, they lived very peacefully in that area for almost 500 years. And then Crusaders came, the Christian Crusaders. The Christians, they love talking and they love saying bad things about Muslims, that they say, you guys should condemn everything, and Islam is a problem and so on. But Christian Crusaders, they came into Jerusalem. And they came into Jerusalem and they slaughtered man, woman, and child. This is the history of Jerusalem. They slaughtered to the extent that even the non-Muslim historians, they write that according to some narrations, the blood of the people were flowing and filling the streets. To the extent that some narrations suggest that they were ankle deep. The non-Muslim, the Crusaders were ankle deep. Other narrations suggest that the horses were ankle deep. Can you imagine blood flowing on the streets? This was what happened. This was the history of Jerusalem. That Muslims and Jews were mercilessly killed, slaughtered in that area. So this is going back, right? And then about less than 100 years later, Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, he recaptured, in less than 88 years, not 100 years, 88 years after the Christian Crusaders, they slaughtered and they massacred all of these Muslims and Jews, and they still stayed there. Again, it's not that they left. The Christian Crusaders, many of them, they stayed in that area. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, when he recaptured Masjid al-Aqsa and Jerusalem, 88 years later, not only did he not butcher everyone. Again, this is maybe his or the people in that area, their forefathers, their grandparents, maybe 88 years is not a long time. And so when he comes there and he sees these Crusaders, right, where 88 years ago they slaughtered all of us, what did he do? Did he slaughter all of them? No, he didn't. He allowed them to leave. He allowed the Christian Crusaders to leave peacefully. He allowed them to leave and they could take whatever they wanted to take, whatever they had with their own belongings, they were allowed to take it. Whereas Muslims were not given that opportunity. So this is not the first time. This is, and then obviously from there, so many other things happen, and throughout time there are so many other circumstances. And as I mentioned, so many times Jerusalem was captured and recaptured. And this is the situation. This is what's been happening there. It's not the first century that this has been happening. But rather, this war in that region has been happening for centuries, for millennia. And so this is not a deep war. Understand this. And so now that we understand a bit more of the history, we have to understand what's the system of Allah Ta'ala. What is the system of Allah Ta'ala? The system of Allah Ta'ala is, as Allah Ta'ala said, Allah Ta'ala says that it's a right on Allah Ta'ala. It's a right on us, meaning it's a right on Allah Ta'ala. Allah Ta'ala will help the believers. Allah Ta'ala will definitely help the believers. Allah Ta'ala will definitely help the oppressed. But it's just a matter of time. See, we don't dictate when the laws of Allah Ta'ala, or when the system of Allah Ta'ala, when the help of Allah Ta'ala comes. But rather, when Allah Ta'ala decides, when Allah Ta'ala wants, He sends the help of Allah, when He sends His help. We look at the different wars that the Prophet ﷺ had to go through. Before we go through the war, when the Prophet ﷺ was in Mecca, and his uncle, Abu Talib, passed away, and now he has no allies in Mecca. He's trying looking for allies in different areas. He goes to Taif, and he finds the people of Taif. He asks them for help. He says, will you help me? And they refuse. They reject him. Not only do they refuse and reject, subhanAllah, last Saturday, I was at the rally, and I was thinking, it was raining, right? And then subhanAllah, I was thinking that right now it's raining. It's raining water. There was a time when it was raining stones on the Prophet ﷺ. There was a time that it was raining stones on the Prophet ﷺ, where the Prophet ﷺ, not only was he rejected by the people of Taif, as we know, he was stoned out of Taif. They didn't allow him to leave peacefully. He didn't go there for war. He was a single individual. And so afterwards, what does he do? He makes dua for Allah Ta'ala. He doesn't make dua to destroy them. He didn't make dua for Allah Ta'ala to destroy them, but rather he made dua for Allah Ta'ala. اللهم إني أشكو إليك ضعف قوتي وقلة حيلتي وهواني على الناس. Such a beautiful dua. It's a very long dua. Such a beautiful dua. Rasulullah makes his dua that, oh Allah, I complain to you about my weakness. About my weakness. That I'm weak. I have a low, our people, they consider me low in their eyes. وهواني على الناس. And then he says, oh Allah, if you are not angry with me, then there's nothing wrong. There's nothing that's wrong. Again, he's bleeding. We know this, right? The narration suggests that he was soaked in blood. His feet, his shoes were clogged in blood. Yet he's not complaining to Allah about these people. What is he saying? Allah, I complain about my own self. That I'm not at my optimum. This is the Prophet of Allah Ta'ala, the most beloved to Allah Ta'ala. Yet this is what he's saying. So that was thought. Moving on. In Badr, the narration suggests, as we know very commonly, right, the non-Muslim army was about 1,000 in number, and they were well equipped, meaning they had their horses, they had the army, they had everything. And the Muslim army, they were not ready for war. And there were only 300 or so in number, 313 or so in number, and they barely had any armor, they barely had horses, they barely had any weapons. And so the Prophet ﷺ, when he saw this, again, it's 3 against 1, right? I mean, it's 3 to 1. And so when the Prophet ﷺ saw this, he went in his tent and he started begging Allah Ta'ala. He's making dua to Allah Ta'ala. And he's pleading to Allah Ta'ala, oh Allah, if these group of people, they're destroyed today, then no one will remain to worship you. And Allah, send me that help. Send me the help that you promised. And he makes a lot of dua. To the extent that his shawl falls off. He was raising his hands and making dua, his shawl fell off. And put the shawl back on, he hugged him from the back. He said, oh, Rasulullah, Allah Ta'ala will send the help. Allah Ta'ala will help you. And Allah Ta'ala did help. Allah Ta'ala did send his help for the Muslims at that time. Moving on, in the Battle of Uhud, we find so many, again, the Prophet ﷺ, and so many different battles. The Battle of Khandaq. The Battle of Khandaq, the Prophet ﷺ, they faced, again, they had about a week. They had a week to dig a trench, 6 days. They built that trench in 6 days. 10,000 non-Muslims were coming to attack the Muslims. So they had about less than a week to build that trench. So they started working on the trench. The Prophet of Allah ﷺ, he's also working there. He's not just watching from the sidelines, he's also working there. So some Muslims, they come across this huge boulder. They come and they ask the Prophet, Ya Rasulullah, can you help us? Can you help us with this boulder? So the Prophet of Allah goes and he takes the axe and he starts, he strikes the boulder once. When he strikes the boulder once, what happens? Sparks fly and he said, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, I have been given the keys of Sham. He said, I see them. I see the palaces of Sham. Right? And 1/3 of the boulder breaks. He strikes it again. He says, Allahu Akbar. And he says, I've been given the keys of I've been given the keys of Persia. And I can see the palaces of the Persians. And another third of the rock breaks, the boulder breaks. And he strikes it again, the entire boulder breaks, and he says, Allahu Akbar. He says, I've been given the keys of Yemen. And and see their palaces. And subhanAllah, all of this was recorded. The Muslims, many of the Sahaba, they saw this. They saw this come to reality. So the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he spoke the truth. And Allah Ta'ala spoke the truth. The Prophet, again, these are people, they didn't have food at that time. Khandaq, they didn't have food. They were starving, and he's talking about conquering lands. He's talking about conquering the superpowers of that time and the greatest armies of that time. The people, the Muslims at that time, they don't have food. And this was a reality. This is Allah Ta'ala, He helped the Muslims. This is the system of Allah Ta'ala. That despite the Muslims being weaker in number, despite the Muslims apparently losing, despite the Muslims not having many resources, Allah Ta'ala will help. And I'm not going to go into other countries, other areas that we've seen, where the help of Allah Ta'ala came. Allah Ta'ala assisted the people despite everything being against them. Allah Ta'ala helped the people. And this is the system of Allah Ta'ala. So we as Muslims, we should not be despondent. We should not lose hope. We never lose, despite everything that we're seeing children, we're seeing hospitals, we're seeing mothers massacred right now before our very eyes. We're seeing all of these things happen. Yet, we should never lose hope. We should never lose hope, but rather we constantly have hope in Allah Ta'ala, and we should do the following 10 things. The remaining few minutes that I have, I'll explain the 10 action items that we should do. Every single one of us, we should be doing these 10 things. The first and foremost, number one thing always is what? Is dua. Istighfar and dua. That's the first thing that we do. We turn to Allah Ta'ala. We don't look at anyone else. We don't rely on anyone for help. We don't rely on anyone for assistance before we turn to Allah Ta'ala. We turn to Allah Ta'ala first. We must turn to Allah Ta'ala first. Right? So we beg Allah Ta'ala. That's the first thing we must do. I've spoken about this in detail. So we beg Allah Ta'ala. That's number one. Number two is that we educate ourselves about what's happening. The past, present, what's happening, what happened in the distant past, right? And the near past, what's been happening currently, everything's happening. We need to educate ourselves. And we need to educate ourselves from the proper sources. You know what hurts me the most? What hurts me the most is when Muslims are uneducated about this. When Muslims are ignorant about this. When Muslims are like, it's not my problem. Again, this past week, right? I mean, in the rally, we'll talk about that also. But subhanAllah, why wasn't it that all the Muslims are there? I spoke to some people and they're like, oh, I have something else to do. I have some XYZ, I have this excuse, I have that excuse. Again, subhanAllah, whatever we can do, we should be doing. So the third is that we educate ourselves. Second is that we educate ourselves. That whatever we learn about what's happening, don't shy away. Many of us, it's not our problem. We think of it as not our problem. That's the unfortunate mindset that we have, that it's not my problem. It's not my people. Again, the Muslim Ummah is one Ummah. Al-mu'minu lil-mu'mini kal-bunyan yashuddu ba'du ba'da. Rasulullah says that the Muslim to the other Muslim is like a building. We support one another. That must always be the case. Islam comes, and our ties of Islam come before everything else. We're Muslim first and then everything else. That must always be on our minds. So we need to educate ourselves, study, learn the history. There are some reliable, websites. Some, not many, but some reliable. Whenever you type in Palestine, they always replace it with Israel. I try to buy a book on Palestine. As soon as you type it into Amazon, they will show you Palestine. They show you the history of Israel first, and then you have to keep searching and go down all the pages, and then you'll find it. But you should search for it. So the second is educate yourself. The third is to spread the truth. You must spread. Whatever you know, you should spread to others. Whatever you're aware of, you should spread to others. You have to do this. I know I was speaking to one of my friends. He was so proud. He was proudly telling me that I helped change 12 people's minds. He was proudly telling me, he listed their names too. I helped change 12 people's minds. And he told me this, and her. I helped change their minds about this situation. How many of us can say that? How many of us are just reserved? We're just shy, we're not saying anything. Why? Because what? Fear of backlash. Fear of what's going to happen to us, what's going to happen to our jobs, and so on. Of course, those are valid concerns, but at the same time, we must understand what's happening there, and we cannot remain silent. So you spread and you speak to others as well. Number 4 is also using social media as well to spread your message. Unfortunately, as we see very commonly, social media and all of these companies, tech companies and so on, they're constantly concealing what's happening. And so you have to dig through it and you have to be very careful. Like if you write Gaza, then they'll censor you, they'll delete your posts and so on. So you put some, ad signs and other things, whatever you can do to correct it and so that you won't get banned. So that the algorithm doesn't ban you or ban your account. Essentially, figure it out. Be tech savvy. Be tech savvy and spreading the message using social media and all platforms that you have. Whatever platforms you have, you should use them. Number 5 is using political power. Whatever political power you have, also you should use it. One, as I mentioned, is attending the rallies. Attending the rally is something that we should do. Yeah, there are some people who keep bringing up concerns. They keep saying that where did the Prophet ﷺ did it? Where the Prophet ﷺ never did it, and so on and so forth. Well, the reality is the Prophet ﷺ, their situations were always different. Their circumstances were different. You can't compare everything apples and oranges. But the reality is the Prophet ﷺ, he did send a Muslim group of people to seek refuge. Where? In Abyssinia. And when they went there, when the Muslims went there, they sought refuge and they did whatever they needed to make the situation better for the Muslims. So this is, of course, and the rule is that everything, or the rule is that in everything, it's permissible until proven otherwise. So it's permissible until proven otherwise in most cases. Right? So for example, in these rallies, you should attend. You should attend until and unless, of course, things are getting out of hand and people are engaging in haram things. Yes, you should not engage in haram things. You should not engage with mixing with the opposite gender. You should not engage in destroying property, hitting others, beating up other people. You should not engage in any of that stuff. Those are, of course, haram. So you should not do any of those things. So moving on. Number 5, use your political power to do whatever you can. Also, I hear some people, they're saying that we're not going to vote. And as I mentioned last week, this is not the time to not vote, but rather it's the time to vote, or to threaten others with your vote. Use the political power that you have. As a citizen of this country, you have the right to vote, you should vote. And they should know that you're going to vote against them. Those in power who are against all of these situations, they should know what's going to happen, what the repercussions will be if they don't support Palestine, if they don't support Gaza, if they don't enact rules that will help change. They should know what's going to happen, that we will vote them out of power. They should know this. So it's not that you should refrain from voting, but rather you should vote. And you should vote for the correct people. If you don't vote, of course, no one is perfect. No politician is perfect. But you search for whoever is the best. Moving on. Number 6 is using your financial power. Whatever financial abilities that you have. Now, how? Firstly, you should boycott. Right? 6 is boycotting. Right? So if you can, you should boycott whatever. Whether it's Starbucks, whether it's Coca-Cola, whatever it may be. You should boycott as many of these Israeli companies as you can. And the way to do that, is not only boycott and not buy yourself, but also to post it on social media that I'm not buying Starbucks, I'm not doing this, or I'm not doing that. Why? Because I don't want to support this what's happening there, right, financially. So not only should you boycott, but also make it known that you are not buying and you're not that you're boycotting them. Otherwise, they don't know. And 1-2 people not saying it, but when you post on social media, more people are aware. Right? And this is the time to use social media for good. Many of us, including myself, we use social media for terrible things. Right? And now it's the time. We waste a lot of time on social media. It's time to use social media for good. Okay? So number 6 is using your financial power that you have. Number 7 is to donate. Is to donate to whichever organizations, organizations that are working on the ground there. Yes, of course, they're limited. There are very few organizations, but still there are some, and you should try to help them. Whatever those who are working on the ground, you should try to help them. Make sure that they are working on the ground and make sure that they are verified organizations as well. Number 8 is to make an intention to sometime in your life go to Masjid al-Aqsa. Sometime in our life we should go to Jerusalem. If we have the ability to do so, we should make that intention that I will go there and I will see the situation firsthand. And once you see something, you sympathize with it. But if you don't go there, it becomes a concept in our minds. We see pictures and videos, but it's not the same. So we should make the intention that if the situation does get better, inshallah, we will go. Inshallah, we'll visit Masjid al-Aqsa and we'll visit Jerusalem. Number 9 is to help the deen of Allah Ta'ala. How is it? Allah Ta'ala doesn't need us. Understand this very well. Allah Ta'ala doesn't need you and I. But we help the deen of Allah Ta'ala by becoming better Muslims. Allah Ta'ala said, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, in tansurullaha yansurkum, wa yuthabbit aqdamakum. That all believers, if you help Allah Ta'ala, meaning what? Allah Ta'ala doesn't need us. But if you help the deen of Allah Ta'ala by promoting and doing good things, by being better Muslims, in tansurullaha yansurkum, Allah Ta'ala will help you. And so that وَيْثَبِّتْ أَقْدَامَكُمْ, and Allah Ta'ala will establish your feet, and Allah Ta'ala will solidify with you. Right? So therefore you should do this. All of us, we should be better Muslims. As I mentioned last week, we should leave some sin for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. Abandon one haram. I'm leaving this one haram for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. So that the people of Palestine, they can be helped. Ya Allah, please up. And I gave the reference of that for the people in the cave. And lastly, we should unite. Unite on what's correct. Unite on what's correct. Not on batil, not on falsehood, not on what's wrong, but unite on what's right. We should all collectively be together on what's right. This is very, very, very important. There's a hadith of the Quran where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, a time will come. And he said, a time will come when the people will gather, meaning the disbelievers will gather on you, just as the people they gather for food at one place. Meaning they'll come to destroy you. All the disbelievers will destroy you, the Muslims. And just as you come together for food, the non-Muslims will come to destroy you. And so one of the Sahaba, they said, Ya Rasulullah, will we be few in number at that time? Will we be few in number at that time? Rasulullah says, no, you will not be few in number, but you'll be so many. You'll be like the scum of a flood. When there's a flood and you have all the trash and all these things on the side, you'll be so many in number. You'll be so many in number. But he says, the Prophet ﷺ, he says that, but you will be weak. Where Allah Ta'ala will take away the fear of the Muslims from the non-Muslims. Allah Ta'ala will take away the fear or the fear of the strength of the Muslims away from the non-Muslims. And he says that, Allah Ta'ala will place wahan in your hearts. And so they said, Ya Rasulullah, what is wahan? What is wahan? So Rasulullah says, it's the love of dunya and the hatred of death, or not to be scared of death and to love dunya. This is the downfall of the ummah. This is what you and I, we need to correct. That we don't love the dunya. Yes, we use the dunya. Yes, we need to work. You must work, you go to work. But we don't love the dunya. We don't allow the dunya to come into our hearts. We don't allow the dunya to come between us and Allah Ta'ala. This is what's necessary. And so this prophecy of the Prophet ﷺ, unfortunately we're seeing it. The Muslims are what? 2 billion in number. More than 2 billion in number, yet we're helpless. Can't do anything. Or we claim to be helpless. Right? So at the very least, the 10 things that I mentioned, we should all be doing this. Every single one of us should be doing all of these things. And always remember that Allah Ta'ala will not change the situation of a people until they change themselves. You and I, we must change ourselves. We must be better Muslims. We must do what's right. Once we improve, then we'll see improvement. Yes, subhanAllah, as I mentioned, you should go to the march. You should go attend the rallies. You should do all of these things. As I said it multiple times. But you should also come to the salah for Fajr. You should also come to the salah for the daily regular prayers. You should also come to the masjid for the regular prayers. Also beg Allah Ta'ala. If you are yourself, if you are not making a change, how can we expect globally? Many of us, we say, oh, if I was there, I would be doing this. Well, you are at the masjid. You're not here in the masjid. How can you expect yourself to be different if you were there? Many people, we love talking a lot. So remember very importantly that we must change ourselves. We must do things better. We must be better Muslims, and then we can see change, inshallah. We will see change once we see change in ourselves. And that's the promise of Allah Ta'ala. حَقٌّ عَلَيْنَا نَصْرُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, as Allah Ta'ala. He said that it's the right of Allah Ta'ala that He will help Muslims, but it's our responsibility to make and effect that change. May Allah Ta'ala give me first, and may Allah Ta'ala give all the people and practice.